The Normandy landings were the landing operations and associated airborne operations on June 6, 1944, of the Allied invasion of Normandy in Operation Overlord during the Second World War. Codenamed Operation Neptune and often referred to as D-Day after the military term, it is the largest seaborne invasion in history. The operation began the liberation of France and the rest of Western Europe and laid the foundations for the Allied victory on the Western Front. Planning for the operation began in 1943. In the months leading up to the invasion, the Allies conducted a substantial military deception, codenamed Operation Bodyguard, to mislead the Germans as to the date and location of the main Allied landings. The weather on the day selected for D-Day was not ideal, and the operation had to be delayed 24 hours. A further postponement would have meant a delay of at least 2 weeks, as the planners had requirements for the phase of the moon, the tides, and time of day. That meant only a few days each month were deemed suitable. German leader Adolf Hitler placed Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in command of German forces and developing fortifications along the Atlantic Wall in anticipation of an invasion. U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt placed Major General Dwight D. Eisenhower in command of Allied forces. The invasion began shortly after midnight on the morning of June 6th, with extensive aerial and naval bombardment as well as an airborne assault, the landing of 24,000 American, British, and Canadian airborne troops. The early morning aerial assault was soon followed by Allied amphibious landings on the coast of France circa 6:30. The target 80-kilometer, 50 miles stretch of the Normandy coast was divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Strong winds blew the landing craft east of their intended positions, particularly at Utah and Omaha. The men landed under heavy fire from gun emplacements overlooking the beaches, and the shore was mined and covered with obstacles such as wooden stakes, metal tripods, and barbed wire, making the work of the beach-clearing teams difficult and dangerous. The highest number of casualties was at Omaha, with its high cliffs. At Gold, Juno, and Sword, several fortified towns were cleared in house-to-house fighting, and 2 major gun emplacements at Gold were disabled using specialized tanks. The Allies were able to establish beachheads at each of the 5 landing sites on the first day, but Carentan, Saint-Lô, and Bayeux remained in German hands. Caen, a major objective, was not captured until July 21st. Only 2 of the beaches, Juno and Gold, were linked on the first day, and all 5 beachheads were not connected until June 12th. German casualties on D-Day have been estimated at 4,000 to 9,000 men. Allied casualties were at least 10,000, with 4,414 confirmed dead. Background: after the German army invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin began pressing his new allies for the creation of a second front in Western Europe. 16. In late May 1942, the Soviet Union and the United States made a joint announcement that a full understanding was reached with regard to the urgent tasks of creating a second front in Europe in 1942. 17. However, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill persuaded U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt to postpone the promised invasion as, even with U.S. help, the Allies did not have adequate forces for such an activity. Instead of an immediate return to France, the Western Allies staged offensives in the Mediterranean theater of operations, where British troops were already stationed. By mid-1943, the campaign in North Africa had been won. The Allies then launched the invasion of Sicily in July 1943 and subsequently invaded the Italian mainland in September the same year. By then, Soviet forces were on the offensive and had won a major victory at the Battle of Stalingrad. The decision to undertake a cross-channel invasion within the next year was taken at the Trident Conference in Washington in May 1943. 19. Initial planning was constrained by the number of available landing craft, most of which were already committed in the Mediterranean and Pacific. 20. At the Tehran Conference in November 1943, Roosevelt and Churchill promised Stalin that they would open the long-delayed Second Front in May 1944. The Allies considered 4 sites for the landings: Brittany, the Cotentin Peninsula, Normandy, and the Pas de Calais. As Brittany and Cotentin are peninsulas, it would have been possible for the Germans to cut off the Allied advance at a relatively narrow isthmus, so these sites were rejected. With the Pas de Calais being the closest point in continental Europe to Britain, the Germans considered it to be the most likely initial landing zone, so it was the most heavily fortified region. 23. But it offered few opportunities for expansion as the area is bounded by numerous rivers. The results of the Battle of Normandy were decisive and changed the course of World War II in Europe. The Allied victory led to the liberation of a large part of northern France, including key cities and regions that had been under German occupation for years. German forces suffered heavy losses in men, equipment, and morale, forcing them into a major retreat toward the east. This defeat weakened Germany's ability to defend its western front and reduced its overall military strength. Another major result was the establishment of a strong Allied foothold in Western Europe, which allowed continuous offensives deeper into occupied territories. The success of the campaign also boosted Allied confidence and coordination, while significantly damaging the strategic position of Nazi Germany. Ultimately, the outcome of the battle accelerated the collapse of German control in Europe and brought the Allies much closer to victory over Adolf Hitler, leading to the final stages of the war. Although the D-Day was a major success that changed the course of World War II, it came with a heavy and heartbreaking cost. Around 10,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing, while thousands of German troops also lost their lives defending the shores. The sea turned red, and the air was filled with fear, courage, and loss. Behind the victory were countless broken families and stories that ended too soon, reminding us that even the greatest triumphs in war carry deep sorrow and sacrifice.